Before the world drew borders across Africa. Before history, books ignored the greatness of African kingdoms. Powerful empires already existed across the continent. Kingdoms built on trade, on strategy, on military strength. And among the greatest rulers of that era was a queen whose name would survive for centuries. A warrior, a commander, a leader feared across kingdoms. Her name was Queen Amina of Zazzau. This is the story of the legendary warrior queen who expanded an empire and became one of the most powerful female rulers in African history. Long before modern borders divided Africa into separate nations. Long before European colonization reshaped the continent. West Africa was already home to powerful kingdoms, thriving trade systems, and sophisticated political structures. Across the vast lands south of the Sahara Desert, cities rose through commerce, military strength, and strategic alliances. And among these growing powers were the Hausa city-states. These states were not small villages hidden from the world. They were organized centers of trade and governance, connected to major commercial routes stretching across North and West Africa. Cities such as Kano, Katsina, Gabir, and Zazzau became increasingly important because they stood at the crossroads of commerce. Caravans moved across the Sahara carrying goods that connected distant regions together. Salt traveled south from the desert. Gold moved north from West African territories. Leather, textiles, grains, and crafted goods passed through markets crowded with merchants, travelers, scholars, and soldiers. The movement of trade created wealth, and wealth created competition. Each city-state wanted greater control over trade routes, influence, and territory. This constant competition shaped the political atmosphere of the region. Kingdoms formed alliances, others prepared for war, and rulers understood one important truth. Power could not survive without strength. Among these Hausa states stood Zazzau, a kingdom strategically positioned along important trade routes. Its location made it valuable economically, but also vulnerable to external threats. To survive in such an environment required careful leadership, military readiness, and political intelligence. This was the world into which Queen Amina was born. Historical traditions place her birth sometime during the 16th century into the royal family of Zazzau. Although exact dates remain uncertain, her story survived through oral traditions passed across generations in northern Nigeria. And while some details vary between accounts, one thing remained consistent. Queen Amina became one of the most remembered rulers in Hausa history. But before she became a warrior queen, before her name spread across the region, she was simply a young girl growing up inside a kingdom shaped by trade, politics, and conflict. From an early age, Amina witnessed the realities of leadership around her. Royal life in the Hausa states was not always peaceful. Palaces were centers of political planning. Military decisions affected the future of kingdoms. Trade agreements influenced stability, and rulers constantly monitored threats from rival territories. For many royal women during this period, life within the palace followed expectations centered around diplomacy, family, and ceremonial responsibilities. But according to oral traditions, Amina's interests were different. She became fascinated by military activity. Instead of ignoring the training grounds, she watched them closely. She observed cavalry soldiers preparing horses for movement across open terrain. She listened to discussions about territorial defense and warfare. And slowly, her curiosity about military strategy grew stronger. At the time, cavalry forces were among the most respected military units in the Hausa states. Horses represented more than transportation. They symbolized status, mobility, and battlefield advantage. A disciplined cavalry unit could determine the outcome of military conflicts. The ability to move quickly across open land gave armies strategic flexibility. And for rulers, maintaining strong military forces was essential for protecting trade routes and defending territories. As Amina grew older, she reportedly became increasingly interested in this world of military discipline and leadership. While some may have expected her to remain distant from warfare because she was royal, historical traditions describe her as someone who embraced military culture instead. She studied movement, she observed strategy, and over time, she began training alongside the royal cavalry. This was unusual enough to attract attention, not because women lacked influence in African history, but because military command required exceptional discipline and authority. Amina's training involved far more than learning to ride horses. She learned coordination, endurance, battlefield organization, and leadership under pressure. Military preparation in that era demanded physical resilience. Campaigns could last for long periods. Armies crossed difficult terrain under extreme environmental conditions. Leaders needed not only courage, but the ability to make decisions quickly during uncertainty. According to oral traditions, Amina developed a reputation for discipline and confidence during this stage of her life. The soldiers around her began respecting her abilities, not simply because she belonged to the royal family, but because she demonstrated commitment to the same demanding standards expected of warriors. Outside the kingdom, however, the political environment remained unstable. Competition between neighboring states continued growing. Trade routes became increasingly important economically, and rulers understood that protecting wealth required military preparedness. This atmosphere shaped the direction of Amina's future leadership, because in the Hausa states, strength was not optional. It was necessary for survival. As trade expanded across West Africa, cities that controlled commercial access gained influence rapidly. Merchants traveling through the region carried not only goods but information. News about powerful rulers, successful military campaigns, and prosperous kingdoms spread through these trade networks. A kingdom's reputation could affect diplomacy, alliances, and economic opportunities. For Zazzau, maintaining strength meant maintaining relevance in a highly competitive political environment. And over time, Amina began understanding something deeper about leadership. Power was not sustained through titles alone. It required preparation. It required strategy, and sometimes, it required force. Within the palace walls, political discussions increasingly centered around territorial security and regional influence. The kingdom needed leaders capable of responding to shifting political realities. And although Amina was still young, her growing understanding of military systems and leadership began setting her apart from others around her. According to historical traditions, she demonstrated unusual confidence and intelligence during this period. But the path ahead would not be simple, because leadership within powerful kingdoms always came with pressure. Rulers were expected to protect economic stability, maintain military strength, and defend political authority. Failure could weaken an entire state. And beyond the borders of Zazzau, rival powers continued watching carefully. The world Amina inherited was one where kingdoms rose through strategy and fell through weakness. As the years passed, the young princess who once observed soldiers from a distance slowly transformed into someone preparing for command. The training grounds that once inspired curiosity now became part of her identity. The political tensions surrounding the kingdom became part of her education, and the realities of leadership became impossible to ignore. But no one yet understood how far her influence would eventually spread. No one yet knew that the young woman studying warfare inside the kingdom of Zazzau would one day become one of the most legendary female rulers in African history. And as the Hausa states continued competing for wealth, influence, and survival, Queen Amina's rise was only beginning.